we thought there might be a bit of a chance for discussion, but I thought maybe we could start by perhaps discussing some of those case scenarios that we did in the pre-survey. The eczema stuff's probably fairly straightforward, so probably most of the discussion's going to be relevant to discussing with Jan. So this is one where we asked the audience. So this is the 4-month baby with cradle cap and mildly inflamed eczema. Mother's thinking of introducing formula feeds. What are your recommendations for skin care? Do I have to point at people? I hate pointing at people. Anyone like to volunteer? If you volunteer for an easy one, you won't get asked the hard ones. Yeah, some moisturiser of their choice. Yeah, I think that would be a reasonable first step. If the child seems to be itchy, it wouldn't be unreasonable to use a mild topical steroid on that as well, and stay away from soap.
Do you want an oil remedy for the cradle cap?
People often massage olive oil, and so olive oil is a little bit irritating on the skin, but it's probably how it works a little bit on lifting the scale on cradle cap. But you could massage just the moisturiser on. Cradle cap's not generally a health issue, it's an aesthetic question. Having a little bit of mild cradle cap is normal for a child, and the parents don't need to be spending a lot of time and energy picking off every last little bit of scale, because that's normal. And it's quite normal for children to have a little bit of that on and off through childhood. Yeah.
Baby shampoo or with the sodium lock? Because I've heard that.
You can, yeah, the shampoos will lift it off. I'm not a big fan of washing children a lot with soaps and shampoos because they generally don't need it. But yes, you could use a mild shampoo on it, but I'd tend to wrap the baby and just do the head.
Yeah, because if the baby's becoming itchy and clawing at it,
then they've probably got some eczema with the cradle cap. Yeah.
So would you use olive oil as opposed to like cooking oil?
No, I don't use any oils. I use sorbeline. But people out there do.
Yeah, no, I heard that olive oil promotes fungal growth.
Yeah, and it sort of it sets at a the temperature that it sets at's wrong as well, so it can go a bit hard and lumpy on the scalp. So I don't tend to use oils. Yeah, and not get overly concerned about mild cradle cap, generally. Recommendations for the infant's diet. You've heard it from the expert. Yes, standard milk formula. I think that's probably what most of you said. What would you recommend for the mother's diet? Normal diet. Excellent. Yes. No, she's probably already gluten-free, sugar-free. Okay. So the 6-month baby who's on mixed cow's milk and breast milk feeds has some mild flexural eczema. They're looking to introduce solid foods. What do you do in terms of management? Skincare? Moisturiser. Same as before. Moisturiser, some topical steroid, they need it. What about infant's diet? What's the recommendations in terms of introducing solids? Normal foods? One at a time? Lots of variety, lots of fibre.
And I think it is, you're right, it's normal foods, but I think it's worth specifically saying to people, start eating peanut, because people don't often think about that.
Peanut is, if you get smooth peanut butter, very easy to add that in to other foods. Very easy. No peanuts themselves, so choking with it. And I often tell people that to cook for themselves because I think all those commercial ones are very sweet.
They put vinegar and they put all sorts of things in there, strange things in there. Don't they? Absolutely. When you look at the labels.
Yeah. Okay. So number 3, a 3-year-old with severe generalised eczema. I'm not quite sure how the skin prick test managed to get done, but they did. So positive to milk, egg, peanut, soy and wheat. What kind of information are you going to want to know? What do you want to know from history? What's he eating?
Any reactions?
Has he reacted to anything? What if they say, well, he used to eat everything, but a year ago we stopped milk and egg because he had eczema? That's quite a common thing that happens. Obviously not, because he's still got really bad eczema. What do you do about reintroducing those?
So you tell him to drive to the casualty department with your egg.
One at a time and doing it like thoughtfully. In a cake. Yeah,
Yeah, and that's what I would normally do is put it back in baking first, build it up. There are milk and egg ladders online. There's New Zealand ones, and there's also some really nice ones on a website called the Irish Food Allergy Network. You Google Irish Food Allergy Network, their ones are, I think, a little simpler. Their ones are, I think, a little simpler than the New Zealand ones, just in terms of a strategy. But it's really about starting with milk and or egg as an ingredient to something that's well cooked and then moving up. I think, you'd be unlucky to lose tolerance, but it's just warming to keep a little bit of an eye out. And the other thing about soy is actually, you'll often see skin, if someone has had a panel done, you'll often see a positive for soy, and you say to them, are you eating soy? No. You say, well, what breed do you eat? And it's white tip top. And almost all the commercial breeds have got soy in them, so you just need to find a couple of things that people are already eating, or just say, actually, you've got tolerance, this is what you're eating, and keep going.
And I think most of the food challenges that my patients have are accidental exposures at home. Usually if you go back and you ask, have you ever had a muffin or a cake? Oh yes, he does eat. He eats cake at preschool. He had that last week. We tried to stop him, but he ate it. How was he? He's fine. So it's very important, that history. So for a 3-year-old with severe generalised eczema, what information do you want to know about the skincare? What history do you need? Because history is very important for eczema as well.
When it started.
He's had it since 6 months and it's been getting worse.
How often are you applying the creams?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What creams are they? Yeah. Yeah.
What's been helpful in the past?
Yeah. 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 Yeah, so I'd be particularly interested to know what their daily plan is, so what moisturiser they're using, how much steroid cream they're using, and they're asking, if you were putting it on now, which bits of the skin would you treat? Because we do often get people putting the steroid cream just on the areas which are the worst until they're just a little bit better, and then they stop. Whereas actually you have to treat all of the eczema, even the milder bits, because otherwise you get, I guess the analogy is like a forest fire. You don't fight a forest fire by squirting your hose on the tallest flames. You fight a forest fire by putting the whole fire out. And if you treat all of the eczema, you'll often put out a lot of that background, the embers, and you may get left with a few stubborn bits around the ankles or the knees or the wrists or whatever, but you can make it much more manageable by doing that. And so that people they're scared to use the steroid cream, so they only use a small amount for a few days when it's really bad. And that's often a failing that people have, rather than treating so that the skin barrier gets good enough.
Question about, I just thought of it. Often we'll see in infants that they'll have what appears to also be fungal involvement going on around the mouth with eczema, like fungal involvement right down around the neck and the mouth and things like that. So would you expect treatment to be with a steroid and like an antifungal?
So probably in this area we get a lot of irritation dermatitis, so from saliva and food. So between about 6 months and 18 to 24 months, you get a lot of irritation there because they're always mouthing everything, so the saliva gets on. Saliva is very irritating to sensitive skin, so kids who have eczema are more prone to getting a irritant dermatitis as well. And a lot of that doesn't respond very well to topical steroid creams. They can occasionally get some secondary infection, but often I'll manage it mainly with a barrier cream. Plain Vaseline is quite good for that. But it will wax and wane, and they tend to look a bit grotty until they're about 18 to 24 months, but then they get better.
Your comment about the steroid receptors I found really helpful because I often find this fear, this phobia, this paranoia about the side effects from steroids from parents. So that was really helpful to learn about the receptors and how they get saturated.
I think when I was training, I worked for a while at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, which is a very big children's specialty hospital. And the two consultants I worked with were nearing retirement age, so they'd been around the block quite a long time. And one of them said to me, I can count on one hand the number of children I've seen with steroid side effects over the years. Whereas you think of all the children you see out there with undertreated disease. So I think that fear is very real, but it's probably overstated. And I think if you're treating eczema effectively, the steroid cream should be a relatively short-term treatment. It shouldn't be a continual treatment for months on end. That's where you run into problems. It should work and you'll be able to pull it back on what you're using. And it should actually be working to make the eczema better.
Short term, weeks or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes the skin. Certainly there have been studies looking at contact allergic dermatitis where if you make the skin better from to a macroscope, so if you look at it with the naked eye it looks better. Under the microscope the inflammatory cells that are there when the skin's inflamed, they're still there and they take some weeks really to improve, and that's just at the cellular level. At the skin barrier level I think it probably takes even longer to heal up. So I always explain to patients that it takes the skin probably a couple of months to heal up after a flare of eczema. Obviously you don't need to use your steroid creams continuously for that whole time, but you probably have to have a weaning off process. And so I usually get people to start off treating quite intensively. In the first week they might use steroids most days, the next week fewer, next week fewer. So that by the time you get to 4 to 6 weeks you shouldn't be using it most days of the week. You should be just using it maybe 2 or 3 days a week. And if you're continuing to need it most days of the week, then the treatment's not working. Something's wrong, and either it's you've got the wrong steroid, they're not putting it on, there's some other aggravating factor, or they need to step up the ladder of treatments in terms of what you're doing. Yeah.
Sorry, just for a practical in my head, you said you had kind of a thing where you gave them the tube and said this is how much you should go through, and you said to me about 7.5 grams of hydrocortisone to cover the whole body of a one.
So if you're doing creams straight and by the fingertip units, to cover the entire body, head to toe, of a 6 to 12 monther would take 7.5 grams.
Okay.
So that's half a tube of a 15 gram tube, if that's what you're using. And so you usually get people, they've got a 15 gram tube of steroid that they've had in the cupboard for the last 2 months, and it's only half empty, and they say the steroid cream's not working. And that's probably the sort of messaging that's going wrong, is that they've put on so little, of course it doesn't work because it's not enough. But if you've got generalised all over eczema, it can be very hard to put from a little tube to put it over, and that's why I sometimes do mix it with the moisturiser to spread it, but it doesn't make it milder.
So they can basically get out of the bath and mix their emollient with the steroid and cover it.
Get them to mix a bit.
So they can do it both at the same time, because you used to say, oh, wait half an hour between the two.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the waiting half an hour thing came from. Obviously from somebody who's never looked after a child. I don't know how you would do that. I really don't understand how you do that. I think the theory is that, I mean, there's also debate about whether you should put the moisturiser on first or the steroid on first, and so people do recommend different practices. There have been a couple of studies that shows it makes no difference, so it probably makes no difference. I usually say put the steroid cream on first and the moisturiser after, but that's just because of how I was trained. I don't mind as long as they go on, doesn't matter. The 45-minute thing, I think, was the idea is that you put the moisturiser on, the skin became well hydrated so that the steroid penetrated better. But the reality is, when you've got a 2-year-old, they will not be standing around for 45 minutes waiting for you to put the other cream on. And you better to actually just put it on and get their clothes on or their pyjamas on and into bed. And so I don't make people wait 45 minutes because I just don't think it's realistic.
Do you, like, sometimes I give them tubey grips, not so much to for the just so they can not get at it, like they can't scratch at it. Is that okay?
I mean, anything that stops scratching's helpful, I think, because that's a big part of that perpetuating process. I often tend just to go for close-fitting pyjamas that you can get from Cotton On Kids or something like that. But yes, the tubular bandages can do the same thing.
Does it help occlude the steroid at all?
It probably does a little bit, so you'd have to be a bit cautious if you were using a more stronger steroid, and particularly in the flexures. And so you have to be a little bit careful if you're putting steroid. When I say putting it all over, I'm not talking about in the armpits and under the nappy and those sorts of areas, because those don't generally need to be treated in eczema. Yeah.
Any comment about wet wraps?
They can work very well. They have a lot of work.
Right.
Would probably be hard to place it. We predominantly use them in a hospital setting. There's some studies done basically the studies have shown that the improvement that you get with wet wraps is predominantly in the first 1 to 2 weeks of use. After that, it levels out. And there has been a study done in the UK showing that using wet wraps showed no significant benefit over applying creams correctly. So I don't tend to get a lot of families to do wet wrapping treatment at home because it's quite difficult to do, and often the kids won't accept it well. Probably the group that you can use it in the most are the small infants. They'll probably tolerate it best, but toddlers and school-age kids, very difficult to put wet wraps on. And because the bandaging's quite expensive, it can be quite costly. Probably the thing that's most helpful about getting wet wraps is usually if you get wet wraps, you get a nurse to go into the home to teach them how to do the wet wraps, and I think that's probably the biggest benefit of wet wrapping, is that nurse education and support.
But then in terms of the creams and steroids, no difference?
You probably get more absorption under wet wraps, and certainly they've shown that if you do wet wrap treatments, you do get measurable level of steroid.
But in terms of product you use, you wouldn't change it for using wet wraps?
I think if you're using wet wraps, you should think of it as being like a pulse of steroid. So if you, I don't know if you're a GP, so you're familiar with arthritis, and you pulse with steroid and then you pull out and you replace it with a non-steroid treatment. Yeah, so it's a little bit like a pulse, really. And so it's not designed as a long-term treatment, it's a short-term treatment, and you should be moving into using your steroid-sparing agents. And for most kids with eczema, which is mild to moderate, the steroid-sparing agent is going to be able to be moisturiser and avoidance of irritants. That's going to be fine for most of them. But for the kids with severe eczema, they're going to need something else as their steroid, and that's where they might need the phototherapy or the methotrexate. So that's a helpful concept, yeah.
And also bleach baths.
Yeah, so I use them regularly. I don't often use them under one. You don't often see so much skin infection, particularly in those very young infants under 6 months. You don't usually tend to see that so often. And I guess I just don't know what the absorption is. We know the skin barrier function is slightly different in under 1-year-olds, so I'm a little bit more cautious about that unless recurrent infection's a problem. But over 1, then I would often use those routinely if they have a bath.
Just about the amount of creams, I think you've probably in the past been saying you need to use 2 pots of cream in 2 weeks, or give them an actual amount.
Yeah, I think that with the moisturisers, I think there's 500 grams a fortnight is usually what people say.
Yeah.
I think it depends a little bit on how frequently you can put it on, to be honest. And the size of the pots are different, so the sorbolene often comes in a 1 kilo tub, so that will last longer. But you want to be sure that they're getting through good quantities.
And of course, we can record it on those
Yeah.
prescribe it to see when they like often clean.
And at the hospital, we can see when they've had them dispensed, which is quite useful. I made up some other cases. If you want to do some more cases, do people have any questions they want to ask? So this is just a quick case. A 7-year-old boy, he's got persistent eczema in the flexors of his knees and elbows for the past year. He's been seen by a GP, very appropriately prescribed sorboline and Locoid, but there's been no improvement. What else do you need to know? Yeah, this was his tube for a year. So yeah, so it's really helpful if you can get people to bring their creams to the consultation. But otherwise, if you can ask them how long is a tube lasting there, it's really helpful information. So this is a 8-year-old with a long history of eczema, and he's got a generalised erythrodermic flare, so he's red all over. Basically, he's shivering, but he's not got a fever. His skin's weeping. He looks pretty miserable. What are you going to do? Yeah, I think admitting them is not a bad idea, actually. He's probably got some super infection. And we would usually wrap in hospital. We don't always, actually. For older kids, we often just do more like a smear and under their pyjamas, because the wraps, as I said, are not tolerated well. So he gets better, gets sent home from hospital, but comes back 4 weeks later, looks the same to you. He's missing school.
Is he compliant with medical?
Is he using his cream still? And I still think that's really important, because some of these kids get left to their own devices. Some parents don't have the ability to support them, and they say he's 8 years old, he should be able to do his creams himself, but actually I don't know any 8-year-old who could be trusted to do their creams themselves. So it's really important to get that idea. If you've got community nurses getting the home, that can be quite helpful as well. But I think this type of situation, you also would be thinking about escalating to other treatments. And that's the sort of patient where they're missing school, they're getting hospitalisations, where we would think about using a treatment like methotrexate or those sorts of things. So don't think that patients should have to put up with this because it's just eczema. And even if you don't have a formal paediatric dermatology service in your hospital, because most of them don't, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be referring them, because if you're not referring them, then people don't know that that service is needed. So it's really important. And it breaks my heart when I see somebody like him when he's 14 and it's been going on since he was 8. And he's missed a lot, and it can be a real problem for him for the rest of his life because of that.